Shalom. Greetings. Welcome back to the broadcast. I'm Shawn. Website is scriptureandprophecy.com. That's where you go to find the archives. That's where you go to support this mission of truth. Well, we're continuing our celebration, if you will, of the Feast of Purim. And we're going to be reading Esther again, except this time from the Greek Septuagint. Now, the Greek Septuagint, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it, but it was the most common text of Jesus' day. It was the Hebrew Bible collected and put together in Greek, which was the most common tongue of the day, kind of how English is the most used tongue of our day. And what's interesting, first of all, if I have to correct myself, I believe I said in earlier this week that the Septuagint version had like 6 extra chapters. I don't know why I was thinking that. That's actually not true. It still has 10 chapters. What it does have, though, is a bunch of additional information. As an example, here at the beginning, we have Mordecai's vision that he has before all of this goes down. Secondly, the decree that goes out that says all the Jews are going to be killed on a certain day, and that whole decree is here for us to read so we can see what it actually says. So there's just a little bit of extra information. Now, why the King James Bible and other English text, when the English Bibles were put together, went with the version they did and not the version that was traditionally read by the Greeks, I'm not sure. There's probably some manuscript reasons why they made that choice, but I think you're going to find this very, very interesting. All right. There's also one other thing we're going to talk about once I get to it that I forgot to mention when we did our study out of the King James Version, that deals with Haman, and just an important historical thing that we need to take note of, that I feel like just really jumps out while we're studying it here in the Septuagint. All right, we're going to read the first 4 chapters, and then, Lord willing, we'll read the rest of it tomorrow. Let's begin. Chapter 1, the book of Esther from the Septuagint. In the 2nd year of the reign of Artaxerxes, the great king, on the 1st day of Nisan, Mardukos, the son of Jairus, the son of Simeus, the son of Chisias, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Jew dwelling in the city Susa, a great man serving in the king's palace, saw a vision. Now he was of the captivity of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried captive from Jerusalem, with Jachinus, the king of Judea. So please note a couple of things. Obviously, it's going to have a Greek transliteration, so the names might sound slightly different as a result of that. However, Artaxerxes might sound similar to Xerxes, the famous king of Persia, which dominated the world at that time. And there's a lot of scholars and people who have looked at this who believe that that is the very king that we're talking about here. Because this king, Artaxerxes, he's got a huge, massive kingdom that's really dominated the known world at that time. And so Mordecai has a vision, and here's what it is. And this was the dream. Behold, voices and noises, thunders and earthquake, tumult upon the earth. And behold, 2 great serpents came forth, both ready for the conflict. And there came from a great voice, by their voice every nation was prepared for battle, even to fight against the nation of the just. And behold, a day of darkness and blackness, tribulation and anguish, affliction and tumult upon the earth. And all the righteous nation was troubled, fearing their own afflictions, and they prepared to die, and cried to God. And from their cry came, as it were, a great river from a little fountain, even much water. And the light and the sun arose, and the lowly were exalted and devoured the honorable. Now, just a little side note here, and I just want to point this out. You'll notice that Mordecai's dream is very apocalyptic and symbolic in nature. Like, we know the story, right? And the story doesn't involve great earthquakes and thunders and all that stuff. Those are just apocalyptic literature. It's symbolism, meaning a great shaking and trouble and things of that nature is coming. Interestingly enough, we know this when we read prophecy and dreams and things like that, especially from the prophets. But then when we get to books like the Book of Revelation and things like that, we take it more literal. And this is why we have so much trouble in the end time prophecy space. As there's just a lot of apocalyptic literature that's just interpreted wrongly. And, as you've heard me say before, prophecy is meant to be understood in hindsight. It's not so that you know the future, right? Unless a prophecy is like given, or a dream is given, and then there's a supernatural interpretation that's given with it, or something of that nature. But just a little side note. So Mordecai has the dream. Continuing on, and Mordecai, it does say Mordecus, but I'm just going to say Mordecai here so we know who we're talking about. And Mordecai, who had seen the vision and what God desired to do, having awoke, kept it in his heart, and desired by all means to interpret it even until night. And Mordecai rested quiet in the palace with Gabbatha and Tharatha, the king's 2 chamberlains, eunuchs who guarded the palace. And he heard their reasoning, and he searched out their plans and learned that they were preparing to lay hands on King Artaxerxes. And he informed the king concerning them. And the king examined the 2 chamberlains, and they confessed and were executed. And the king wrote these things for a memorial. Also Mordecai wrote concerning these matters. And the king commanded Mordecai to attend to the palace, and gave gifts for his service. And Amon, the son of Amathus, the Bugin, was honorable in the sight of the king. And he endeavored to hurt Mordecai and his people because of the 2 chamberlains of the king. So please note, according to the Septuagint, this little scuffle, this hatred that Haman has for Mordecai starts all the way back with these 2 chamberlains that Mordecai found out were plotting to kill the king and made it known to the king, which is very interesting. It almost makes you think that Haman's end goal is to just be leader of the whole world, isn't it? Continuing on. And it came to pass after these things. By the way, that part that I just read, it's like this prequel to the chapter. So it's chapter 1, and then you read this prequel where it gives a little information, and then it actually begins the story. And so that's just interesting. Like, I'm getting ready to start verse 1. That little introduction there would be a piece of the puzzle that that's not included in, like, the King James as an example. All right, verse 1. And it came to pass after those things, in the days of Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes ruled over 170 provinces from India. In those days, when King Artaxerxes was on the throne in the city of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast to his friends and the other nations, and to the nobles of the Persians and Medes, and the chief of the satraps. And after this, after he had shown them the wealth of his kingdom, and the abundant glory of wealth during 180 days, when I say the days of the marriage feast were completed, the king made a banquet to the nations who were present in the city 6 days, in the court of the king's house, which was adorned with hangings of fine linen and flax on cords, and fine linen and purple, fastened to golden and silver studs on the pillars of Parian marble and stone. There were golden and silver couches on a pavement of emerald stone, and of pearl, and of Persian stone, and open-worked coverings, variously flowered, having roses worked around about, gold and silver cups, and small cups of carbuncle, set out of the value of 30,000 talents. Abundant and sweet wines, which the king himself drank. And this banquet was not according to the appointed law, but so the king would have it, he changed the stewards to perform his will and that of the company. Also Esther, the queen, made a banquet for the women in the palace where King Artaxerxes dwelt. Now on the 7th day, the king, being merry, told Ammon and Bezin and Tharatha and Barazi and Zoatholtha and Abatsa and Tharba, the 7 chamberlains, servant of King Artaxerxes, to bring in the queen to him, to enthrone her and crown her with a diadem, and to show her the princes and her beauty to the nations, for she was beautiful. But Queen Esther hearkened not to him to come with the chamberlains, so the king was grieved and angered. So please note, in this story you get more of a sense that the king wanted to honor the queen, right? Like he wanted to bring her out and put the crown on her head and of course show off her beauty. When she refuses, he's not just angry, it says. It says that he's grieved. He's hurt that she won't come. And of course he's angry and I'm sure embarrassed in front of all these nobles when he's trying to show that he's the greatest in the world, basically. Verse 13. And he said to his friends, Thus has Esther spoken. Pronounce thereof upon the case law and judgment. Sarkisius and Sarithius and Malicer, the princes of Persians and Medes, who were near the king, who sat chief in rank by the king, drew near to him, and reported to him according to the laws and how it was proper to do to Queen Esther, because she had not done the things commanded of the king by the chamberlains. And Machias said to the king and to the princes, Queen Esther has not wronged the king only, but also all the king's rulers and princes. For he has told them the words of the queen, and how she disobeyed the king. As then said he, she refused to obey King Artaxerxes. To this day shall the other ladies of the chiefs and of the Persians and Medes, having heard what she said to the king, dare in the same way to dishonor their husbands. If then it seem good to the king, let him make a royal decree, and let it be written according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, and let him not alter it, and let not the queen come to him any more, and let the king give her royalty to a woman better than she. And let the law of the king which he hath made be widely proclaimed in his kingdom, and so shall all the women give honor to their husbands, from the poor even to the rich. And the saying pleased the king and princes. And the king did as Machias had said, and sent into all the kingdom through several provinces according to their language, in order that men might be feared in their own houses. Chapter 2. And after this the king's anger was pacified, and he no more mentioned Esther, bearing in mind what she had said, and how he had condemned her. Then the servants of the king said, Let there be sought for the king a chance and beautiful young virgins. And let the king appoint local governors in all the provinces of the kingdom, and let them select fair and chaste young damsels, and bring them to the city of Susa, into the women's apartment, and let them be consigned to the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, and let things for purification and other attendance be given to him, and let the woman who shall please the king be queen instead of Esther. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now, there was a Jew in the city of Susa, and his name was Mordecai, the son of Jairus, the son of Simeas, the son of Caesius, of the tribe of Benjamin, who had been brought a prisoner from Jerusalem, which Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had carried into captivity. And he had fostered a child, daughter of Aminadab, his father's brother, and her name was Esther. And when her parents were dead, he brought her up for a wife for himself, and the damsel was beautiful. And because the king's ordinance was published, many damsels were gathered to the city, Susa, under the hand of Gia. And Esther was brought to Gia, the keeper of women. And the damsel pleased him, and she found favor in his sight. And he hasted to give her the things of purification, and her portion, and the 7 maidens appointed her out of the palace, and he treated her and her maidens well in the women's apartment. But Esther discovered not her family nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to tell. But Mordecai used to walk every day by the woman's court, to see what would become of Esther. Now this was the time for a virgin to go into the king, when she would have fulfilled 12 months, for so are the days of purification fulfilled, 6 months while they are anointing themselves with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and woman's purifications. And when the damsel goes into the king, to offer whomsoever he shall give the command, will bring her to come with him from the woman's apartment to the king's chamber. She enters in the evening and in the morning, and departs to the second woman's apartment, where Gia, the king chamberlain, is keeper of the women. And she goes not into the king again, unless she should be called by name. And when the time was fulfilled for Esther, the daughter of Amminadab, the brother of Mordecai, father, to go to the king, she neglected nothing from which the chamberlains, the woman's keeper, commanded. For Esther found grace in the sight of all that looked upon her. So Esther went to the king Artaxerxes in the 12th month, which is Adar, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther, and she found favor beyond all the other virgins, and he put on her the queen's crown. And the king made a banquet for all of his friends and great men 7 days, and highly celebrated the marriage of Esther, and made a release to those who were under his dominion. But Mordecai served in the palace. Now Esther did not discover her kindred, for so Mordecai commanded her to fear God and to perform his commandments, as when she was with him, and Esther changed not her manner of life. Please note, so Esther becomes queen. She doesn't reveal to anybody that she's a Jew, because Mordecai had warned her in advance not to. But it says that she continued to perform and live out the Lord's commandments, God's commandments, just as she did before she was queen. So she doesn't change her character because she becomes the most powerful woman on the earth. Verse 21. And 2 chamberlains of the king, the chiefs of the bodyguard, were grieved because Mordecai was promoted, and they sought to kill King Artaxerxes. So there's an interesting thing to note. The reason that the 2 guys were plotting to kill Artaxerxes was because they were angry that Mordecai was promoted. You see, what's happening is the favor that Mordecai is having is angering the people around him. These 2 chamberlains who plot to kill Artaxerxes, even Haman. And the matter was discovered to Mordecai, and he made it known to Esther, and she declared to the king the matter of the conspiracy. And the king examined the 2 chamberlains and hanged them. And the king gave orders to make a note for memorial in the royal records of the good offers of Mordecai as a commendation. Chapter 3. And after this, King Artaxerxes highly honored Amon, son of Amadathus, the Bugian, and exalted him, and set his seat above all of his friends. And all in the palace did him obeisance, for so the king had given orders to do. But Mordecai did not do him obeisance. And they in the king's palace said to Mordecai, Mordecai, why dost thou transgress the commands of the king? Thus they spoke daily to him, but he hearkened not unto them. So they represented to Amon that Mordecai resisted the commands of the king, and Mordecai had shown them that he was a Jew. And then Amon understood that Mordecai did not obeisance to him. He was greatly enraged, and took counsel to destroy utterly all the Jews who were under the rule of Artaxerxes. And he made a decree in the 12th year of his reign of Artaxerxes, and cast lots daily and monthly, to slay in one day the race of Mordecai. And the lot fell on the 14th day of the month, which is Adar. Please note that's where the feast of Purim and the word Purim comes from, because Pur means lot. Haman cast lots to decide when to kill the Jews. That's where that name comes from. And he spoke to King Artaxerxes, saying, There is a nation scattered among the nations in all thy kingdom, and their laws differ from those of all the other nations, and they disobey the laws of the king. And it is not expedient for the king to let them alone. If it seem good to the king, let him make a decree to destroy them, and I will remit into the king's treasury 10,000 talents of silver. And the king took off his ring, and he gave it to the hand of Ammon, to seal the decree against the Jews. And the king said to Ammon, Keep the silver, and treat the nation as thou wilt. So the king recorders were called in on the first month of the 13th day, and they wrote as Ammon commanded to the captains and governors in every province, from India to Ethiopia, to 127 provinces, and to the rulers of nations according to their several languages, in the name of King Artaxerxes. And the message was sent by post throughout the kingdom of Artaxerxes to destroy utterly the race of the Jews on the first day of the 12th month, which is Adar, and to plunder their goods. And the following is a copy of the letter. So please note, what you're getting ready to hear is the actual letter itself. This is what went out to the nations. The great King Artaxerxes writes thus to the rulers and inferior governors of 127 provinces, from India even to Ethiopia, who hold authority under him, ruling over many nations, and having obtained dominion over the whole world. I was minded, not elated by the confidence of power, but ever conducting myself with great moderation and gentleness, to make the lives of my subjects continually tranquil, desiring both to maintain the kingdom quiet and orderly to its uttermost limits, and to restore the peace desired by all men. But when I inquired of my counselors how this should be brought to pass, Ammon, who excels in soundness of judgment among us, and has been manifestly well inclined without wavering, with unshaken fidelity, had obtained the second post of the kingdom, informed us that a certain ill-disposed people is mixed up with all the tribes throughout the world, opposed in their law to every nation, and continually neglecting the commands of the king, so that the united government's blasphemy administered by us not quietly established. Having then conceived that this nation alone after all others is continually set in opposition to every man, introducing a charge of foreign code of laws, injuriously plotting to accomplish the worst of evils against our interest, and against the happy establishment of the monarchy, we signify to you, in the letter written by Haman, who is set over the public affairs, and is our second governor, to destroy them all utterly with their wives and children by the swords of their enemies, without pity or sparing any, on the 14th day of the 12th month Adar of the present year, that the people after time and now ill-disposed to us, having been violently consigned to death in one day, may hereafter secure us continually a well-constituted and quiet state of affairs. Now I want you to note something. I want you to note this phrase. Here's the command. By Ammon, who set over the public affairs, and is our second governor, to destroy them all utterly, with their wives and their children, by the swords of the enemies, without sparing any. Now, Haman is an Amalek, right? Like when you read out the King James Bible or any English text, he's an Amalek. Here's what's interesting. The Amalekites were supposed to be destroyed off the earth. This was supposed to be done by King Saul. King Saul didn't do what he was supposed to do. He preserved some of the things for himself. He preserved some of the animals for sacrifices. He let the king live. And as a result, that is when the Lord spoke to Samuel and told him to tell King Saul that the kingdom was going to be taken from him because of his disobedience. So if we go to 1 Samuel 15:8, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we got to get this point. So let's go to 1 Samuel 15. Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go, smite Amalek, and see that word? And utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not. That's the exact same phrase that we just read about what Haman wants to do to the Jews. But slay both man and woman and infant and suckling ox and sheep and camel and ass. Long story short, Saul did not carry this out all the way. And as a result, we still have some Amalekites alive in Esther's day, one being Haman, who now wants to destroy all the Jews utterly off the earth. One man's disobedience to God has led to this crisis that we're looking at right now in the book of Esther. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Haman wants to execute the exact same judgment that was pronounced on his people hundreds of years before that. Just an interesting thing to note. Continuing on, because we're running out of time here, and I want to read chapter 4 really quickly. Chapter 3 ends with this verse, and the copies of the letters were published in every province. And an order was given to all the nations to be ready against the day. And the business was hastened, and that at Susa, and the king and Aman began to drink, but the city was troubled. Chapter 4. But Mordecai, having perceived what was done, rent his garments and put on sackcloth and sprinkled dust upon himself, and having rushed forth through the open street of the city, he cried with a loud voice, "A nation that has done no wrong is going to be destroyed." And he came to the king's gate and stood, for it was not lawful for him to enter into the palace wearing sackcloth and ashes. In every province where the letters were published, there was crying and lamentation and great mourning on the part of the Jews. They spread for themselves sackcloth and ashes. And the queen's maid and the chamberlains went and told her. And when she had heard what was done, she was disturbed, and she sent clothes to Mordecai to take away his sackcloth, but he consented not. So Esther called for her chamberlain, Artaxerxes, who waited upon her. And she sent to learn the truth from Mordecai. And Mordecai showed him what was done, and the promise which Aman had made the king of 10,000 talents to be paid into the treasury, that he might destroy the Jews. She gave him the copy of the writing that was published in Susa concerning their destruction to show Esther, and told him to charge her to go in and interact to the king, and to beg him for the people, remembering, said he, the days of thy low estate, how thou were nursed by my hand, because Aman, who holds the next place to the king, has spoken against us for death. Do thou call upon the Lord, and speak to the king concerning us, to deliver us from death. By the way, God, the Lord, is mentioned a lot in the Septuagint text. The text we have in our standard Bible doesn't mention him, but he's clearly mentioned here. Right here, Mordecai is telling Esther to go pray to the Lord for help. Verse 9. So Archias went, and he told her all these words. And Esther said to Archias, Go to Mordecai and say, All the nations of the empire know that whoever, man or woman, shall go into the king into the inner court uncalled, that person cannot live. Only to whomsoever the king shall stretch out his golden scepter, he shall live. And I have not been called to go into the king for these 30 days. And Archias reported to Mordecai all the words of Esther. And Mordecai said to Archias, Go and say to her, Esther, say not to thyself that thou alone will escape in the kingdom, more than all the other Jews. For if thou shalt refuse to hearken on this occasion, help and protection will be to the Jews from another quarter. But thou and thy father's house will perish. And who knows if thou hast been made queen for this very occasion? And Esther sent the man that came to her to Mordecai, saying, Go, assemble the Jews that are in Susa, and fast ye for me, and eat not and drink not for 3 days, night and day. And I also and my maidens will fast. And then I will go to the king contrary to the law, even if I must die. So Mordecai went and did all that Esther commanded. And he besought the Lord, making mention of all the works of the Lord. And he said, Lord God, King, ruler over all, for all things are in thy power, and there is none one that should oppose thee in thy purpose to save Israel. By the way, what we're getting here is Mordecai's prayer to the Lord. For thou hast made the heavens, and the earth, and every wonderful thing in the world under heaven, and thou art Lord of all, and there is no one who shall resist thee, Lord. Thou knowest all things. Thou knowest, Lord, that it is not in insolence, nor haughtiness, nor love of glory that I have done this, to refuse obstinance to the haughty Ammon. For I would gladly have kissed the soles of his feet for the safety of Israel. But I have done this, that I might not set the glory of man above the glory of God. And I will not worship any one except thee, my Lord. And I will not do those things in haughtiness. And now, O Lord God, the King, the God of Abraham, spare thy people, for our enemies are looking upon to our destruction, and they do have desire to destroy thine ancient inheritance. Do not overlook thy peculiar people, whom thou hast redeemed for thyself out of the land of Egypt. Hearken to my prayer, and be propitious to thy inheritance, and turn our mourning into gladness, that we may live and sing praise to thy name, O Lord. And do not utterly destroy the mouth of them that praise thee, O Lord. And all Israel cried with all their might, for the death was before their eyes. And Queen Esther betook herself for refuge to the Lord, being taken as it were in the agony of death, and having taken off her glorious apparel, and put garments of distress and mourning instead of grand perfumes, and filled her head with ashes and dung. By the way, you want to talk about humility? You find me one queen, one female leader in all of the world who's willing to take off her royal garments, put ashes and dung in her hair as a way of humbling herself before the Lord. This is a godly woman. And filled every place of her glad adorning with torn curls of her hair. And she besought the Lord of the God Israel, and said, O my Lord, thou alone art king. Help me, who am destitute, and have no helper but thee. For my danger is near at hand, and I have heard from my birth and the tribe of my kindred that thou, Lord, tookest Israel out of all the nations, and our fathers out of all their kindred for a perpetual inheritance, and hast wrought for them all that thou hast said. And now we have sinned before thee, and thou hast delivered us into the hands of our enemies, because we honored their gods. Thou art righteous, O Lord. But now they have now contended with the bitterness of our slavery, and have laid their hands on the hands of their idols, in order to establish the decree of thy mouth, and utterly to destroy thine inheritance, and to stop the mouth of them that praise thee, and to extinguish the glory of thy house and thy altar, and to open the mouth of the Gentiles to speak the praises of vanities, and in order that the mortal king should be admired forever. O Lord, do not resign thy scepter to them that are not, and let them not laugh at our fall, but turn their counsel against themselves, and make an example of him who has begun to injure us. Remember us, O Lord. Magnify thyself in the time of our affliction, and encourage me, O King of gods and ruler of dominion. Put harmonious speech into my mouth before the lion, and return his heart to hate him that fights against us, to utterly destruction of him that consent with him. But deliver us by thy hand, and help me who am destitute, and have none but thee, O Lord. Thou knowest all things, and knowest that I hate the glory of transgressors, and that I abhor the couch of the uncircumcised and every stranger. Thou knowest my debt and my necessity, for I abhor the symbol of my proud station, which is upon my head in the days of my splendor. I abhor it in the menstruous cloth, and I wear it not in the days of my tranquility. And thy handmaid has not eaten at the table of Ammon, and I have not honored the banquet of the king, neither have I drunk wine of the libations, neither has thy handmaid rejoiced since the day of my promotion until now, except in thee. O Lord God of Abraham, O God who has power over all, hearken to the voice of the desperate, and deliver us from the hand of them that devise mischief, and deliver me from my fear. And that, my friends, is the end of our study for this morning. So here you have two prayers, one by Mordecai, one by Esther, where they're both praising the one true God of Israel. So, depending on how you view the Septuagint, it kind of makes that argument go to the wayside that there's all these arguments for why God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. Because it's like, well, I guess it depends on which version you're looking at, because this one, there's nothing but to talk about God. And both Esther and Mordecai recognize that he's their only chance for salvation and hope. And of course, Esther ends by not just praying for deliverance from all this, but praying that God would deliver her from her fear. Because she has to do this fearful thing, which is appear unannounced and uninvited before the king. That is our study for this morning. I pray you've been blessed, and I hope that these words go forth and pierce hearts and cause you to draw closer to God. I want to thank you for your prayers. It's much needed, and your support. Those of you who support the podcast, thank you so much. Couldn't do this without you. That's all I have for you this morning. Peace and grace be with all of you, and until next time, God bless.